Hey everyone, welcome back. You guys really wanted to know more about what's going on with South Korea's national pension, especially, well, what it could mean for young people with all this talk about reforms. So we're diving deep.
It's certainly a hot topic, and for good reason. South Korea is kind of facing, a population puzzle, fewer babies, more seniors, and that really puts a strain on a pension system that needs a steady flow of contributions to keep working.
Right, yeah. Our sources are painting a pretty stark picture, honestly, especially with that birth rate of just 0.72. But before we get too far into the weeds with reform proposals, could you maybe give us like a really quick breakdown of just the basics? How does this whole pension system thing work?
Yeah, absolutely. Imagine, if you will, like a giant potluck where everyone brings a dish to feed the whole group. So in this case, that potluck is the national pension system. People who are working, they contribute a portion of their income. Those are what's called pension premiums. And then that money is what is used to pay pensions to those folks who've already retired. So the idea is that today's workers, they're supporting yesterday's retirees.
Okay, so the potluck, it needs a constant supply of dishes coming in to keep everyone happy, right?
Right.
So what happens then when there are fewer people coming to the potluck with food?
Mm-hmm.
Because, that's kind of what we're seeing happening right now in South Korea, fewer babies being born.
Exactly. Fewer babies being born today means fewer young people that are entering the workforce in the future. And that translates into fewer contributions that are being made to the pension potluck, right? But at the same time, the number of retirees who are ready to enjoy the feast, that just keeps growing.
Oh.
So it's a recipe for trouble if something doesn't change.
And that's where our listener comes in, right?
Yeah.
If you are part of the MZ generation, this situation is a really big deal for your future.
Absolutely, yeah. The decisions that are being made today about how to try and fix the system, those are going to directly impact what your retirement looks like down the road.
All right. So let's dig into some of these proposed reforms then. Our sources are mentioning two big ones that are being debated right now.
Okay.
Raising the premium rate and then increasing the income replacement rate.
Right.
So let's unpack each of those.
Okay.
Let's start with this premium rate hike.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean for our listener? What does that mean for the person listening to this right now?
So imagine that premium rate is kind of like the price tag on the dish that you're bringing to the pension potluck.
Okay.
Right now, it's 9% of your income. And that's split between you and your employer. So let's say, just for example, you're making $2 million a month.
Yeah.
Okay, so you would contribute 90,000 and then your employer would match that 90,000. But the proposal that's on the table right now is to bump that price tag up to 13%.
Whoa, okay. So if the price of entry goes up, doesn't that mean people will bring more to the potluck? But, what does that look like in real world terms for like someone who's maybe just starting out their career?
Well, in that same scenario, making $2 million a month instead of contributing just 90,000, now you're looking at 130,000 coming out of your paycheck each month. And that's a pretty big jump, especially when you're, just trying to make ends meet in a city like Seoul.
That's a pretty big chunk of change.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if just asking everyone to bring a more expensive dish, is that really the solution here? Are there maybe any downsides to just hiking up that premium rate like that?
That's a great question. And that's kind of where things start to get a little bit more complicated. So remember how we talked about people needing to contribute for a full 40 years for this system to really work as it was intended?
Right. The full 40 years to really, really enjoy that potluck.
Yeah, exactly. The problem is not everyone stays at the potluck for that full 40 years. People change careers, they take breaks, they start their own businesses. Life happens.
Yeah.
And if you're not consistently contributing during that entire time, even with that higher premium rate, well, you're not going to see the full benefit when you retire.
So even if you bring a fancier dish, you might not get to taste all the courses if you leave the potluck early. So what does that then mean for the MZ generation, who, statistically speaking, they might not have these super consistent, straight 40-year careers like maybe our parents did?
Yeah, that's a good point. One of our sources actually highlighted a pretty concerning projection. Even with the higher premium rate, and even assuming people stay enrolled in the pension for longer than they are now, the amount that the MZ generation is projected to get back when they retire, it's barely higher than what retirees are getting now.
So hold on. So they're being asked to bring a pricier dish, but they might not even get to taste that much more of the feast in the end. I feel like that would lead to some pretty frustrated people. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of concern among young people right now that they're being asked to shoulder a much bigger burden, but without a guarantee of a proportionally better outcome. It makes them question if just raising the premium rate is really enough to address the core problems with the system.
Okay, so maybe asking everyone to pay more isn't the silver bullet that we're hoping for.
Yeah.
What about that other proposal then? The one about boosting the income replacement rate. What does that even mean, and how might that affect our listener?
Think of the income replacement rate like it's the size of your plate at the pension potluck. It's basically the percentage of your income that you were making before you retired that you get back as your pension.
Okay.
So let's say, for example, you were making $2 million a month before you retired, and the income replacement rate at that time is 40%. You would get $800,000 a month as your pension.
Okay.
So the government's proposing to increase that rate to 45%.
Okay, so bigger plate, you get to take home more of the potluck goodies. Sounds pretty good so far, but I'm guessing there are some nuances here.
Right.
That our listener needs to be aware of.
Yeah.
What's the catch?
Well, just like with the premium rate, that 45% payout, that assumes that you've been consistently contributing to the potluck for a full 40 years. And as we were talking about earlier, that's not always realistic for a lot of people.
Right, all those career changes and life events and things like that.
Exactly.
It makes it tough to stay at the potluck for the full 4 decades.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that even with this bigger plate, some people might still end up, leaving hungry?
That's the concern, especially for younger generations, yeah. If they haven't been contributing for that full 40 years, that larger income replacement rate isn't going to actually translate into a much bigger benefit for them.
It's like being handed a giant plate, but only being allowed to fill it up halfway.
Exactly.
So we've got this premium rate hike, which is like increasing the cost of entry to the potluck.
Right.
And then we've got the income replacement rate boost, which is like getting a bigger plate. But it seems like neither one of these is really guaranteeing a satisfying meal in the end.
Yeah.
Especially not for the MZ generation.
That's a good analogy, and it kind of highlights why just changing these two numbers might not actually solve the fundamental problem.
So it seems like we need to be thinking beyond just the cost of the dish and the size of the plate, right?
Yeah.
Our source material mentioned some other potential solutions too.
Yes, exactly. Some experts are suggesting that we need to rethink the structure of the potluck itself. So one idea is to extend the retirement age, so essentially keeping people at the table longer.
Okay, so more people contributing for a longer period of time.
Right.
I mean, that would help keep the potluck going, right? What are some of the arguments for and against that approach?
Well, proponents of this idea, they argue that people are living longer, they're living healthier lives these days, and so it makes sense to adjust that retirement age accordingly. It could also help address that shrinking workforce issue that we were talking about earlier. Yeah. But on the other hand, opponents, they're raising some concerns about job availability for younger generations if older workers are staying in the workforce for longer.
Right, so it's like a trade-off then. Keeping the older folks at the table longer might limit how much space there is for the younger folks to join in. What other ideas are kind of being tossed around out there?
Well, another proposal is focusing on trying to encourage people to just stay in the workforce longer, period. Maybe through different kinds of incentives or maybe more flexible work arrangements.
Okay, so instead of forcing people to stay at the potluck, maybe make it a little bit more appealing so that they actually want to stick around. Mm-hmm. But I think we kind of have to address the elephant in the room here, right?
Right.
The source material also talked about the political gridlock that's surrounding all of this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Even if everyone agreed on the best way to fix the potluck, getting those changes implemented, that requires political will and cooperation. Mm-hmm. And right now, that seems to be in very short supply.
Right. So the government and the National Assembly are kind of stuck, right? They're kind of in this stalemate. Can you maybe explain how that impacts the chances of any of these solutions, actually coming to fruition?
Yeah, so think about it this way. Imagine trying to organize a potluck where everyone is arguing about what should be on the menu. They can't decide on a seating arrangement and they're fighting about who's bringing what dish. It's going to be pretty tough to get everyone on the same page and actually enjoy the meal.
And while everyone's arguing, all the food's getting cold and people are getting hungry, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's a pretty good analogy for what's happening with these pension reforms right now. It seems like time's of the essence.
Absolutely. The longer it takes to find a solution, the more difficult the problem becomes, and the more uncertain the future of that pension potluck is going to look for the MZ generation.
Okay, so we've got a system that's facing some serious challenges.
Yeah.
We've got a bunch of potential solutions that are being thrown around. But then we've got this political logjam that's really preventing anything from happening quickly.
Right.
It feels a little bit overwhelming, to be honest. Where does that leave our listener? What can they do when faced with all of this? I mean, it's a lot, right? It can feel a little overwhelming to think about all of this. But I think it's important to remember, even when it comes to these like big, huge system issues, there are still things that you can be doing, that you, as a person, you can be doing to take control of your own situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's easy to feel really powerless when you're thinking about these big, complex systems, but you're not just like a bystander in this whole potluck thing,
Right. You don't just get handed a plate and have to take whatever's on it.
Yeah.
You can make choices. You can prepare for the future. Regardless of what happens with the larger system at play here.
Yeah.
What are some things that our listeners can do? Like, what are some actual practical steps that people can take to feel a little bit more empowered in this situation?
Well, first and foremost, I think, stay informed. We've only really scratched the surface here today, and the more that you understand about how the pension system works, about the proposed reforms, and honestly, even about the political landscape, the better equipped you're going to be to actually make informed decisions.
Knowledge is power, right? So don't just take what you see on social media or what you hear from your friends as the be all and end all. Like, actually dig into those sources.
Right. Yeah.
Read different perspectives and form your own conclusions.
Exactly. And I think beyond just staying informed, think about like your own personal financial planning, right? Even if the pension potluck is going through some challenges, you can still be taking steps to build your own, financial safety net.
So what are like some concrete things that people can be doing?
Yeah, well, consider maybe exploring different savings and investment options. Look into private retirement plans and maybe even think about, diversifying your income streams. So the more proactive you are, the less reliant you're going to be on, any single source of income in retirement.
I like that. Be proactive, take control.
Right.
Build your own future. But it's also about, having a voice in those bigger conversations too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The MZ generation, they need to be actively engaged in trying to shape the future of this pension system. So contact your representatives, participate in those public forums, and make your voice heard. You have a stake in this potluck too.
Yeah, don't just accept the status quo. Advocate for the kind of future that you want to see. And that actually brings me to my final thought for our listeners today. We've talked a lot about the problems and the potential solutions, but let's get creative for a second. Imagine that you're in charge. You get to redesign this entire pension system in South Korea. Like, what does your ideal retirement potluck look like?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, what kind of dishes are on the table? Who's invited to participate? How do we make sure everyone gets a fair share and everyone leaves feeling satisfied? It's a thought-provoking question, right? But I think it can lead to some really interesting ideas and maybe some really interesting solutions.
Right. It's a good reminder that even in the face of really complex challenges, there's always room for innovation and for creativity. And who knows, maybe some of the listeners out there will be the ones to come up with, those groundbreaking solutions.
That's what we love about these deep dives.
Yeah.
They're not just about absorbing information. It's about sparking those new ideas and empowering you to take action.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
You never know what you might find. We'll catch you in the next episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks.